Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on how to prepare for the new PMP exam. This webinar focuses on predominantly giving people a sense of what is in the current and also the new exam for the PMP that started on January 1st, 2021. So we'll talk a little bit about the exam, the approach, and also clarify some of the distinctions that's in the current version of the exam versus the one in 2020. And rest assured, if you started preparing for the exam in 2020, much of what you spent and prepare are still valid today, even though there are a couple of significant changes. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Dr. T. Wu, and I am the CEO of PMO Advisory. I actually wear multiple hats. I'm also a full-time professor at Montclair State University, as well as I teach in other schools. I see that people have just joined us. Thank you. Please mute yourself. You can unmute yourself if you have questions, and I welcome that so that this presentation is more interactive. So feel free to unmute and ask your question and remute yourself if you need to. Now, if it does get a little bit noisy, I can mute everybody, but again, you can still unmute yourself. So going back to a little bit about my background, I am the CEO of PMO Advisory. I am PMP certified, and I'm certified in program, portfolio, as well as risk. And you can see most of my experience are largely working in the field, and I still work today. Had a client meeting this morning, for example, but I also teach in universities. The other thing is I also work in the standard world. So some of the standards, including the upcoming PMBOK Guide 7, I was on the review team, helping TMI, as well as this role of professional project manager advancing the field. So the key objective for this presentation is pretty straightforward. We wanted to have a clear understanding of the key requirements of this new exam. I call it new, even though it's been out for now almost four and a half months. Given the pandemic, I think the uptake is still a little bit on the slower side. So there are definitely changing requirements as compared to before. I also want to talk about what are some of the challenges and obstacles and how you can plan to tackle them. The key takeaway from this session was really simple. For those of you who's interested in the new exam, this presentation will help you develop a plan to prepare and, of course, pass the PMP exam on the first try. So the agenda is we'll go talk a little bit about the PMI certification. We'll also talk about the journey of getting to this place of PMP. We'll highlight some of the aspects of the exam, especially compare and contrast with the exam, for example, that expired at the end of 2020. We also discuss challenges and good practices. These will help you form a solid understanding, develop a plan for you to pass the PMP. And finally, we're going to do a little pitch of ourselves about the course, the boot camp that PMO Advisory offers. So let's talk a little bit about the PMP. The Project Management Professional, PMP, is considered the gold standard in project management certification. And there are actually a couple in the world, but comparatively speaking, PMP is the most widely recognized around the world, especially in North America, South America. PMI, Project Management Institute, the body that sponsors and certifies this certification, is not even located that far away from where I am. I'm right now in Montclair, New Jersey, and PMI is really about 90 minutes from us in Pennsylvania. What the certification symbolizes is that professionals who have it have both the knowledge and the experience. So this is not a ivory tower certificate. This is a certificate indicating that you have been there, let the team have done the work. And by the way, you also have the knowledge. As I mentioned, the certifying body, Project Management Institute, is one of the largest nonprofit professional organization, especially for project managers. Currently, there are over 1 million active PMP credential holders. So it is extraordinarily popular. And I want to put that number in perspective. When I became PMP certified in 2003, so roughly 18 years ago, I think at the time there was about 7,500 of us, give or take, let's say 10,000. Right. Today, there's 1.03, maybe 1.04 million. So you could see the growth rate is extraordinarily impressive. And why is the case? Why is PMP growing leap and bounds? Well, going to the compensation side, studies have consistently shown that people with the certification, PMP, commands about 26% more income compensation than people who does not have. So that immediately gives you a sense. CNN, some years ago, about 4 years ago, even did an article and called the PMP essentially the poor man's MBA because the gain in PMP, one certification at 26%, is quite equivalent to that of an MBA degree. So it is quite attractive. It is probably one of the most widely sought after professional certification in this space. And also, of course, the other benefit of having it is you have demonstrated that you have a commanding knowledge of project management. So looking at the benefit a little bit deeper, if you look at the what I mentioned, PMI does the salary survey about once, I think every other year. It's not exactly regular. Some years they seem to do it annually, other years they skip a year. But right now they're on the 11th edition, and that just came out in early 2020. So it's pretty fresh. The salary survey, the latest one, they have over 32,000 respondents across 42 countries. So you could do the math. On average, some of the country may be smaller, only have a couple hundred. Countries like the United States, I think, have 7,000 or 8,000 people responding. So that's a fairly significant number of people. PMP Premium. This is the comparison of equivalent project manager who holds a certification versus the one who doesn't. Right? So they look at the compensation across this body, and they found that in the countries such as Philippines, the premium is the greatest at 84%. Belgium, 35%, United States, 26%, Canada, 24%, China, 21%, Germany, etc. And if you go to this link here, as you can see, you actually could pull up the survey and you could look across all 42 countries. It is pretty impressive. Now, one thing I do want to say about this number is this does not necessarily mean that if you have the certification the day after, you're going to get a bump in salary of 26% in the United States. Okay, I just want to be clear. What it does mean is that if you are in the job market, if you're looking to negotiate income, if you're looking for the next job, your marketability has now increased. And also that chances are there is a premium now with that certification. So over the next couple of years, as your job changes, evolve, as you look for different opportunities within your organization or elsewhere, chances are this upward trend will help you propel to a point about 26%. Okay. Now, on the right here, you can see the article that I briefly mentioned from CNN. And the CNN, this article was done a couple of years ago. It showed that clearly they call it the poor man's MBA, right? And by calling it a poor man's MBA, essentially it means that you could get it on the cheap at the cost of getting a PMP. Many people could do it on themselves. And in some ways, I teach in university, and students ask me, I think it is eminently a self-learnable certification. However, it is a lot of knowledge. For those of you who may not have the time, who want to have a definitive coach, a voice to tell them what to do, studying by self is very labor intensive. I have known one of my friends who took literally 2 years to prepare for the exam. Now, she didn't study every single day, but over time she spent considerable time preparing. So that is something to consider. Okay. Of course, MBA, on the other hand, costs quite a bit of money as well as opportunity costs. That's why CNN came up with this title. As I mentioned, in 2003, when I became PMP, there was about 7,500 of us. And if you sort of just graph this chart of upward growth, you can see it's a fairly steep angle growth. These numbers, for the most part, that I have plotted in here are based actual reporting. So you could see the very high growth of the PMP. In some years, PMP shows up as one of the top 10 certification people want to pursue. I don't know if it's still top 10 today, but it has shown up on that. So that's a little bit about the PMP, why you want it from a financial perspective, from a knowledge perspective. It really makes you stand out. And by the way, some of you may want certain sector. So if you like, for example, work in government, pretty much a lot of government jobs these days, especially federal government, that requires that project management, project leadership. It probably in the job description will at least say PMP preferred, right? It is a big checkbox if you have it. Okay, so I think that covers that. Again, if people who just joined us have any questions, feel free to jump in. If you are not planning to speak, please mute your line because I could hear a little bit of background noise. And you could just mute yourself if you do wish to speak. It's easy enough to unmute. So let's move on to the qualification for the PMP. Generally speaking, what most people are hung up on is the experience of leading project. And this is where the difference is. If you have a high school degree or equivalent, it's 60 months leading project. If you have a 4-year degree or more, say graduate degree, it is 36 months. Now, key word here is leading a project, not just working project management. You could be working on project for 10 years, never play a leadership role, and you don't qualify. Okay. So leadership means that you are playing the role project manager, project leader. If it's on a large team, it could be even a team lead. In many large projects, the team lead in their own right are also leaders of their smaller projects. The other criteria is education. PMI do require people who is pursuing PMP to have 35 hours of PM education. And this should be largely done through schools and universities, through registered training partner or authorized training partner. PMO Advisory is one of them. Or there are other ways to do that. Now, if you have a CAPM, that also fulfills this condition. And for those of you who may not be familiar with CAPM, CAPM stands for Certified Associate in Project Management. And that is an associate certification that doesn't actually require leadership experience to obtain. So, for example, a lot of my students at Montclair State University or China Europe International Business School, pretty much by taking any of my classes in project management, you would have fulfilled the education requirement for CAPM, which pretty much is the only requirement because all of you already have your high school degree, I'm sure. So you can then go on pursue CAPM. Okay. So CAPM as a potential criteria here is actually something new. Before it wasn't here, you still required 35 hours education. Now this change made CAPM as potentially one of the checkbox that you could fulfill. So let's look at the journey of preparing for the PMP. As I mentioned, different people do have different roadmap and also the length of this journey. I think people have asked me, so I have, let's say, 60 days to prepare. Is that enough time? Or how much time does it take to prepare for the PMP? I do think it actually differs a little bit. If people are able to concentrate and say spend on average 1 or 2 hours per day and a little bit more on the weekend, then you could probably prepare this somewhere within 100 days. And that's assuming you already have a pretty good understanding of project management, leadership experience. So your job there is, of course, read the latest guides, prepare for the exam, strategize, use practice exam to make sure you're honing the certain topics and weaknesses you have and prepare for that. If you are start from a fresh, you have taken a course, let's say with me in project management, but you still try to get up to that 3 years of leadership experience, I would say a good window for yourself is somewhere between half a year to a year. I wouldn't really go beyond a year because this is, if you stretch out too far, people tend to sometimes let it go, right? So you'd rather have a concentrated time. But I do know students, I do have friends who spend more than a year. There are other people who want to get immediately. I mean, you look at the job market, chances are economy is going to turn better. You ask yourself, how fast can I do this? If you already have the checkbox on the 3 years of leadership experience, and assuming you have a fairly decent background in project management, maybe you could compress it to 60 days. But PMP has a lot of knowledge, and it's probably hard to compress beyond that 60 days. So I guess if you just eat and drink and study, is 30 days sufficient? Probably, but that is going to be a bit stretch. Generally speaking, the reason why it'll take 90 days, even if you sort of do it in a concerted effort, or 100 days, as I mentioned, is partly because you need to apply for it. So the basic 4 steps I see this journey are prepare. So make sure this is something you want to do, because it does require a significant investment of your time and energy. It's not so much the cost versus, let's say, MBA, right? That has a lot huge, bigger cost to it. So you do want to prepare yourself, because once you start this path, I'd rather you spend 1 or 2 hours per day for the next 90 days or 100 days than to say spend 10 hours a week, but happen to be on Saturday once a week. That probably will take you almost at least half a year, if not almost a year, to prepare. So prepare yourself, gather your resources, do your homework, develop an initial plan, then apply. Applying the PMP application is straightforward enough. If you're a PMI member, you could just go to certification and literally hit apply, and you apply. There's a bit of trick to working on the application. We previously had another webinar just on the application process itself, so you want to refer to that. But largely, if you do it properly, if you already have a good documentation of your experience, people you can serve as a reference, then you could get to the application pretty quickly. Now, the thing about application is you can also be audited. And so hence it's important to do your homework, meaning have the people who you plan to mention in your application already contact them to make sure they're still happy and well and ready to support you, because otherwise it'll take a lot of time to chase people around. But generally speaking, the application process itself takes, let's say, even on the fast side, a month. And that is a good amount of time. Now, the pandemic may actually stretch things out a little bit, as I found. So that's why it's very hard to do the PMP within, say, a month time, because the application itself may take that long. But once you pass the application process, and PMI will inform you via email, congratulations, Jane or John, you now have a year to prepare and pass the exam. So the countdown starts at that moment. And you really want to leverage that time. So a lot of people started preparing, studying, even before that countdown clock starts ticking. The next step is passing the exam. And here we'll talk a lot about the tricks of the trade, what's new in the new PMP exam. So all this is designed to help you pass. And then, of course, celebrate. I think PMP is a significant accomplishment. So absolutely share the good news with your friends and loved ones to share the good news. Especially, I think, in pandemic, we do need more good news. Now, jump forward a little bit. When you do take the test, and one of my, by the way, project management strategy is, of course, plan backwards. This is, let's say, what does the end look like, and what do I need to do to get there? The PMP exam later we'll talk about is 190 questions over a 4-hour period with a 10-minute break. When you hit submit at the end of the test, you'll immediately, maybe give a minute because there's usually a short survey. When you respond to the survey, they show you the results. So you'll know right away whether you pass or fail. So that's the good news. The examination content outline that later we'll briefly mention will show you the different areas, but for each of those areas, they will show you a sort of a grading. And the grading are verbal. So in this case, you will see an area, say environment, business environment to be exact, and you'll have a rating whether it's need improvement, below target, target, or above target. Now, clearly above target is great, but you probably did more than you need to pass the test. Now, for factor of safety, that is worthwhile to consider. But overall, what you should target is achieving the target. And you could see the percentage. Target generally means that you have somewhere between 65 to 75% correct responses. And the performance meets the minimal requirement for the exam. Below target, as you can imagine, means exactly that. It means that you didn't fail too badly. On the other hand, you didn't pass. And then needs improvement is when you are significantly below the target. Generally on PMI exam, and this is PMP is still relatively new in this newest exam, so it's hard to talk specific. But generally in the PMI world, there are a number of areas. You are allowed to have perhaps one, maybe two below target, as long as you have something to offset it and above target. So the overall exam is really try to pass around, we believe around 70%, give or take. That's one reason why in a lot of our exam simulator, we set the minimal passing score at 75, just to give a little bit buffer. Okay. So this scorecard is important to remember. So now let's look at what's new in this test. Okay. The new PMP exam that started in January 2021 is considerably different than before. This is probably, in my experience working with the PMP exam for the past 20 years, this is the single biggest leap in terms of change. So what are these big changes? Well, number one is many of you, I'm sure in the field or even taking classes with me, so probably reflected of classes at your school. The project management world is going through itself significant change for the past 20 years. 20 years ago, the dominant method, in some ways the only method that people talk about, is today what we call predictive method or the traditional method. Right? In the traditional method of project management, think of it as ready, aim, fire. Right? If you are an archer, you're going to try to hit a target. Ready is getting yourself ready, sort of gauging the wind, making sure you have your bow and arrow. Right? Prepare, this is when you start aiming and gauging yourself how far you're going to pull the bow and shoot the arrow and before you shoot. So predictive methodology is very logical. It somewhat is still the undercurrent of all methodology today because it is based on very proven, time-proven, classic management principles. But there's the emergence of adaptive. In some industries, such as software industry, adaptive method today may very well be more dominant than the predictive. In other industries, take construction, predictive, I believe, is still far more dominant. But regardless, this whole agile method, adaptive method, is now 50% of the exam. Now, to be fair, even in 2020, so prior to the changeover, there were already many adaptive questions. The percentage was never truly published, so we don't know. Based on our experience, it probably hovers around 15 to 20%. So in this case, the increase wasn't from 0 to 50, but more like 15% to 50%. Okay? But nonetheless, even that is still a very significant jump. That's the big change. So today, for example, studying for the exam, reading the PMBOK or any of the project management textbook, you want to make sure that you also read the Agile Practice Guide or a chapter on Agile. The second big change is the organization of the exam. Prior, there is the organization is based on life cycle, so initiation, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, closing. That was largely the examination content outline. Today, PMI changed it to be three focal areas: the people, the process, and the business environment. So that didn't necessarily mean all the questions are different. It just means the orientation are different. And then the third change, which frankly is not a huge change, is that there are now new exam question type. The old exam were all multiple choice, 100% of the question. In the new exam, overwhelming majority are still multiple choice. But there are different question format, like mix and matching, hot spots in which you have to associate. So there are different new exam types. There's a bit of a change also on the timing. It used to be 4 hours and 200 questions. Now, technically, it is 3 hours and 50 minutes because they force you to take a 10-minute break, and the questions also reduced to 190. So there's that slight difference. So you could see the examination content outline, as I mentioned before, in the 2015 examination content outline that went through all the way to 2020. You could see the breakdown. Today, 42% of the questions are people, 52% are process, business environment is 8%. So different orientation. The multiple choice test itself, by the way, there's a typo. It should be says 190 question, not 180. The 4 hours, it's really 3 hours and 50 minutes because you have a 10-minute break. The other type of questions that can include is multiple response, matching, hotspot, and limited fill in the blank. So if you want to learn more, there's a link here you can access. So what are some of the biggest challenges that we have seen? First of all, 50% agile question. This is, again, as I mentioned, not completely new, but the intensity of agile question really changed the dynamic. And for people who's really new to this, the agile question adds a layer of complexity to the question. Because the world before is fairly prescriptive, right? You plan, you execute, and you plan again, and you execute again. In the world of agile, it is a lot more fluid. The planning is less intense. The preparation, everything depends on the method of agile. The execution now tends to be in smaller sprints or modular format, because the whole idea of agile is you want it to review with the customer as reasonably many times as possible, so you could get interactive feedback that you could build into the next sprint. So the entire mentality of the test shifts. And when you look at agile question, the theme of adaptability, flexibility, agility tend to be sometimes more important than detailed planning, preparation, writing out documentations. So that's a big change in terms of a mindset. The second is similar to before. This one didn't really change from the old exam to the new, but what I call the intensity of content, because there's just a lot of content in the PMP. For those of you who look at the 6th edition, the PMBOK, when you throw in the Agile Guide, which now is a part of the test, these two guides combine are over 900 pages. Now, granted, PMI has a lot of acknowledgments at the back of their publication, so even if you take those pages out, you're still talking about somewhere around 800 pages. Right? Still very, very intense, and that's why I said when you prepare for the PMP earlier, I said for a lot of people, you may want to at least have 100 days, and this is when you are ready to dedicate yourself. Otherwise, half a year is quite reasonable. The third point, the irony of the PMP exam is that it actually is not necessarily easier if you have a lot of experience. So this is somewhat of a bit of an irony. The reason being is that the more you know, the more you have done outside, the more projects you have led, the more companies you have worked with, chances are they have done things differently, and they may not be aligned with the PMI approach. PMI approach is very process-oriented, open system thinking, quite logical. Some people argue it's a little bit too logical and granular in terms of the prescription of the processes, but nonetheless, it is very, very logical. What you do in real life, however, can be quite varied. It depends a lot on the organization culture, the type of organization, the industry, the maturity of the organization, the type of people you're working with, the type of project. So, ironically, the more experience you have, in some ways, the more you have to almost learn the PMI way, take the exam, and perhaps you can forget some of that. Now, of course, to be fair to PMI, what they're proposing, of course, are based on common and best practice. But what's common is by no means exactly how you do things. So what I found in our experience working with a lot of participants that we have trained over time is as more experience a person has, it actually becomes somewhat of an issue because they have more baggages that they need to unload. The time pressure for the exam is really also very high. You could do the math very quickly, and essentially what you find yourself is that you need to pretty much have about 80 some seconds per question. And that's pretty intense. If you think about it, an average adult, like most of us, if we read our favorite novel, let's say you're a John Grisham fan, right? I like John Grisham. And we could read about maybe 200 words a minute on the faster end. But if we start reading something technical, say a project management textbook, right? I recently wrote one, that speed probably are half almost immediately. In some cases, probably much slower. So in other words, you're getting about 100 words a minute. Well, if you think about an average question, multiple choice question, you have the question, you have 4 choice of answer. That's probably come pretty close to 80, 100 words. And by the way, another trick in the PMP is do read all 4 choices, because PMP exam is often not necessarily about the right answer, but about the best answer. So you definitely want to read all 4. But if you read all that 4, it takes almost a minute, 60 seconds just to read it. So you could do the math, right? If you only have 80 some seconds and you're already spending a whole 60 seconds of that reading the question, you only have 20 seconds on average to think through. And in some cases, you may not even have that because you may want to take extra break or something like that. So the time pressure really, really hits home. For a lot of adults, especially when you're older, there's a mental fatigue that's more likely to kick in. So you're mentally more tired. So in other words, in the 4-hour segment, your first hour may very well be the most productive, downgrade a notch in the second hour, downgrade another notch in the third hour, and downgrade further even the 4th hour. So that may not necessarily be always that helpful. So you need to plan that into your own strategy. You know yourself the best. So how can you meet these challenges? Here are some suggestions. One, on the agile side, you can gain agile knowledge and experience through reading and practice. If you have the opportunity to work in an organization, work on projects, look at how project managers probably may be utilizing some versions of agile. PMI did publish a very good book, PMI's Agile Guide, Agile Practice Guide, is a pretty good book, and it's actually a fairly interesting read compared to a lot of PMI's publication. So we highly recommend you read that. Number 2, intensely. Learn from qualified people and approved material. One of the problems with PMP is, I'm sure you could do this yourself. After this, just go Google PMP, and you'll find a ton of information out there, many of which are outdated. Some of them are probably not correct. So one of the things, if you want to shortcut that process and really get to the heart of the matter, is learn from qualified trainers and approved material. This whole area became so problematic, by the way, meaning there's a lot of materials out there, and people training them may not be that qualified, that PMI in late last year also enforced their authorized training partner to make sure that the trainers are actually certified by PMI and also use PMI material for PMP Bootcamp. So later we'll go to and talk about PMO Advisory, but we are an authorized training partner. And by definition, we have trainers who are approved, who went through their course from PMI and received a badge, and also that we use PMI material. So you get to the definitive information. The third challenge, as I mentioned, alignment of your experience with PMI way. Now, this gets a bit hard, and this is a little bit individualized. When you look at this material, especially if you go to one of these courses, you should always think about what have I done, how does things work in my current work environment, and how well does it map to the PMI way of things. And what you'll find most likely is it maps pretty well, except at some junctions, some decision processes may be different. Some of the words that you use may be a little bit different, calling things by different name. But that is important because these are the nuances that make very well, especially if you're around the edge of passing versus not passing, help you pass the exam. One of the last thing is, as I mentioned, the time. Average adults read maybe 80 to 100 words per minute of the technical content, so 4 hours goes by very quickly. And really, there is no easy way to tackle that other than through practice, practice, practice. And that's one reason why we developed a very large test bank. Our latest test bank actually has 3,720 questions, over 1,000 agile questions, just to give people, participants in our bootcamp, the opportunity to practice. So at the end of the day, what are some good practices for the exam preparation? One, develop a sound strategy. You know yourself the best. You know how much time you have. You know how long the future you want to obtain the certification. So give yourself a plan. My advice is once you establish a plan, assuming it's within a reasonable time, say 6 months, make sure you dedicate some time every single day. Even if it is just 15 minutes to review the notes that you have from the previous day. Because it builds the right momentum and the cadence will help you get to the finish line. Number 2, use authoritative materials. This is where internet is both a blessing and a curse because it's just inundate you with a ton of information, many of which are probably outdated. I mean, if you think about how Google algorithm works, it works well when people look up for a particular topic, hit a particular source. Except this exam is new, so chances are what you hit are something that's old. Right? So make sure you use authoritative material. Here, I advocate looking at the Project Management Institute's authorized training partner because they use PMI's authoritative material. Work with qualified trainers. There are a lot of people out there who have PMP, who may have taught PMP, but there's only a handful who are certified by the PMI. They have to go through special trainer program and pass series exam to get a badge. Right? So again, all the ATPs, authorized training partners, should use qualified trainers. I don't believe they will risk not using one, so I'm assuming all of them will be good trainers. Number 4, give yourself a metric so you know you're making progress. In our training courses, our participants use our test bank, has a fairly objective metrics. If they got 60 a week ago, this week they're now seems to be in the 65 range, you know you're getting better. Right? But there could be other metrics. How fast you read the question, right? All of those can help you, especially if you have 6 months, you have this much material you want to read. What is your pace of getting to those materials? And then finally, practice. In some ways, once you have enough the critical mass of knowledge, not to say reading more PMBOK doesn't help, it probably does, but at some point you are reaching a point of diminishing return. What really makes a difference is that you're able to read the question, understand the question, scan the answer, find the answer, and quickly select and move on to the next question. So practice, practice, practice is the final recommendation, or final good practice, I should say. A couple of additional recommendations to think about. On Agile, learn the essentials, such as the principles of Agile, and also the hybrid project management cycle. Hybrid questions are actually pretty frequent on the exam. Hybrid is when organizations essentially carve out their custom between the traditional project management and the Agile. If you don't have a lot of time and you really need to study Agile, as I mentioned, read the Agile practice guide. But if that itself is not enough, you probably should also learn Scrum. Most likely is because Scrum is the most popular of the Agile methodology. So a lot of the concepts that even shares in methodologies beyond Scrum come from Scrum to some extent. And then also intuitively understand why organizations should pick traditional, Agile, or hybrid framework. So that's one. The second is the PMBOK guide is still relevant. As some of you know, currently the 7th edition is coming out soon. But in our direct conversation with PMI, and this is attending their meeting, speaking with them, the exam is not going to be based on 7.0 anytime soon. So this is not hearsay from any other party. This is exactly from PMI. So the 6.0 for the near term, let's say over the next year, will still probably be the document to look at. Now, PMI will say our exam is not based on PMBOK. And by the way, there's a lot of truth to that. But there's just so many different project management literature. So unless you have a lot of time, and PMI do publish a reference list of those books, my suggestion is still focusing on the PMBOK. The third recommendation, know the basic. Even though there are fewer questions about the specific of the process or the process order, about life cycle, all of that still matters. Because at the end of the day, Project Management Institute, PMBOK, is based on open system thinking, which is process-based. Most questions on the exam are situational, so you expect questions based on what project manager should do, Scrum Master, or product owner should perform. But you still need to know the basic. In PMI, in the PMBOK 6, have 49 processes, right? There's input, tools, techniques, output. Even though there's a lot less emphasis on the rigidity of the inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs, the definition, when you should apply them, still matter. That said, don't go overboard. I think one of the positive change is before you almost have to always try to memorize the input, output, tools, and techniques in a rigid format. Now it is less rigid. Chances are questions are less likely to be on the exact order. On the other hand, it does matter, right? If you're working traditional, you still need to plan before you execute. And by the way, that's true for Agile. You still need to have some planning before you have execution. Earned value, by the way, is still important. And the final one is, even though there are other type of questions, such as matching hotspots, multiple select, fill in the blank, early example feedback that we hear are still dominated by multiple choice. So while the other format, you should get some sense of it, but at the end of the day, it is still multiple choice that dominates the test questions. And perhaps our most important recommendation, going back to getting to the authoritative information, authoritative people. If you decide to attend professional training, we highly recommend you go with a project management authorized training partner, ATP. And there are really 3 reasons. One, ATP uses the PMI authorized material. And the all of them are pretty similar in the senses that they all use PMI material. You'll have electronic access for 1 year. All the PMI ATPs are pre-authorized, so the education hours that you gain are automatically recognized. Otherwise, PMI may audit those education hours, the 35. PMI ATPs themselves are a highly qualified firm, and their trainers are also certified by the PMI to teach the PMP course. So if you have limited time, or if you want to get to the heart of the matter quickly, our recommendation is go with ATP for training. Here, for those listening to this, you may want to pause this, and by the way, we'll post this webinar on our website, so you want to pause here. Here are some additional resources that we'd recommend that people should look through. So I'm going to make a little pitch about us. PMO Advisory is a premier authorized training partner. And we jokingly call ourselves 1 inch wide, but a foot deep, because we get involved in a lot of areas. We are one of the few companies in the world that provides training not just for PMP, but also PFMP, portfolio management, program management, risk management, RNP, Agile Certified Practitioner, CAPM. For organization, we offer one of the widest range of project management and strategic execution trainings. And you can find our upcoming courses at the event page, so pmoadvisory.com/events. Why should you consider taking class with us? Well, one, we are PMI Premier Authorized Training Partner. So that means we use PMI approved material. Our courses, 35 hours, are accepted automatically. Also, based on our own internal tracking, we have 100% first-time pass rate using our simple methodology. And our methodology is really quite simple. As I mentioned, we built our own PMP exam simulator. Right now has about 3,700 questions in it. And for people who achieve 75% or greater in the exam mode 2 consecutive times within 7 days, and then go take the actual exam in 7 days, it's been 100%. The longer verbiage around that is generally our exam simulator has 2 modes, what we call the flexible or the practice mode and the exam mode. And for those that use the practice mode, once you start getting yourself into the high 60s or 70s, this is when we recommend you transition to the exam mode. And the exam mode largely simulates the environment, 4 hours of 190 questions, right? So once you hitting yourself transition to exam mode, this is when you should probably schedule your exam. And typically it'll be a couple weeks out. So you still have a couple weeks. And in that couple weeks, use exam mode as much as possible. You do need about 4 hours every time because of the number of questions. And literally, for people who have achieved 75% or greater multiple times in that short window and take the exam, has never failed. By the way, the third reason is our trainers are best in the industry. What makes PMO Advisory unique is we're also a consulting firm. So our trainers for PMP are actually not just trainers, they're doers. They are project professionals out there leading projects. So what you gain is not necessarily book knowledge. You also gain the wisdom and the experience of our trainer. And plus, they went through the training program. So very qualified trainers. Here's what we have offered for people who's attending this webinar. We're offering our PMP Bootcamp at a special rate of $1,099 for limited time. The normal price is going to be almost $1,500. So for people who's attending this webinar, if you register and you see the link down here, using that code, you could get additional $50 off. Right now, we have a class planned in May. This is a definitive class. This class will take place. And it happens on Tuesday and Thursday weeknight evenings from 7 to 10:30 Eastern Time. and it is for 10 weeks. So 3.5 hours per session, multiplied by 10 sessions, you get 35 hours. And we only have a few seats remaining. We're also pre-registering for future classes, as you can see down here. And the week is the starting week. We're still pre-registration as you go in. You'll see there are a couple of different options for the format. Is it weeknight? Is it weekend? Is it 2 days of the weekend, or is it 1 day? We typically make a decision once we see that there's more of one particular choice. So this could help us plan a little bit load. We pass a special saving to our customers, and this tends to work pretty well. So if you're interested to pre-register for a future course, you could do that as well. And the URL for that is pmoadvisory.com/PMP. That's all I have planned for today. Right now, I'll open the floor to any questions. If you have any questions, please let me know. Going once, twice. Okay. If there are no further questions, then you could see here's a summary of the links and the emails that you could contact us. You could register under the pmoadvisory.com/PMP page. And with that said, thank you so much for your time. Hope everybody have a wonderful day. Be safe, and hope to see you at one of our classes. Thank you.